Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining Joint Custody. My name is Benjamin Duve. I'm Global Head of Partnerships at GK8 by Galaxy, former banking executive and central banker. And I'm very happy to have today with me Dave from Polkadot Capital Group. Dave, maybe you do a quick introduction for everyone, who you are and what you do, which is very interesting, I have to say.
Awesome. Great to be here, everyone. And thanks for having me on, Ben. Dave Sedacca with Polkadot. I've been in the ecosystem since 2022, working at Parity Technology, the engineering labs company behind Polkadot. And, excited to dive into a little bit about Polkadot and our journey ahead.
Sounds great. And I think the first question I always ask, and I think we have some parallels there, how did you get into digital assets and crypto? Because you do have that institutional background, I understand, right?
Yeah, of course. And before we dive into the details, I'll do my quick disclaimer. All the views here today are my own, and they shouldn't be interpreted as official statements on behalf of Parity or Polkadot. So yeah, correct, Ben. I've had quite the interesting journey throughout my career, working at the behemoths of BlackRock and to other late stage tech startups, really getting an understanding of how business operate in different financial and strategy roles. But I first got exposure to crypto back in 2017 when I was working at BlackRock with a few of my colleagues. And it really pulled me in by thinking about this programmable value, thinking about solving problems, global settlement, and especially that centralization and trust issue. And then I reconnected with an old colleague from a previous career, and he had just joined Parity and asked for a little bit of help. And I found my way into blockchain at the beginning of 2022.
And that's always the thing, right? I found out is that you talk to someone reaches out, and then either you can say, no, I'm too busy, I have other things to do, or you just engage and have a bit of a discussion. And that's how I see many times opportunities come about to get into that digital field. It's more informal, right? It's not a standardized approach.
Yeah, of course. And I think, I came in with my background from more of like a corporate perspective, planning, budgeting, making sure that the labs company is set up, and then, adapting and learning as I went to get more ingrained into the actual protocol, the wallet management, the staking, the technology itself. So it's been always a learning journey throughout the years.
Yeah, you have to be curious in that field for sure. It's quite evolving. Now,
Yeah.
let's get a little bit the audience acquainted with Polkadot and Polkadot Capital Group. What is it, or what is Polkadot and Polkadot Capital Group, and what are you guys trying to achieve? Maybe giving a little bit of a more basic explanation around it.
Yeah, of course. So those that are not familiar with Polkadot, Polkadot was founded by Dr. Gavin Wood. Gavin was the co-founder of Ethereum. If most people don't know, he coined the term Web3 over a decade ago. He also constructed the Ethereum virtual machine and wrote the smart contract language Solidity. So I think going and founding Polkadot, I believe he left Ethereum for a few different reasons around seeing the full potential of blockchain technology, and that's on different bases for interoperability. How do each of these blockchains talk to each other? Thinking about shared security models and also scalability. And I think each of those points he was able to kind of start from scratch and build what Polkadot is today. And I think it's had a successful journey since its launch. It's been built for over a decade now, but Polkadot launched in 2020, and there's been successful businesses that have come out of it. And I think a few most notable ones that some may recognize are Peak, which is a machine economy. They're really tokenizing real world assets like machine identities and usage rights. Mythical Games, a very popular one that's using gaming on chain with trading cards as NFTs, to a company called Accurist. They're actually decentralizing compute by using your cell phone, right? When it's not working, to get rewards. To even, AI and verifiable data across companies like Origin Trail and NeuroWeb, really utilizing blockchain at scale from a B2B perspective. But at the end of the day, there's always been learnings throughout that journey, right? I think when you're first to market with technology, especially in the early days, there might be barriers to entry. And therefore, how do we think about pivoting that in the next age of Polkadot, what we're calling the second age of Polkadot. And Gavin's been back as CEO of Parity Technologies since last summer. And it's really great because this core foundational infrastructure, like I said, has been built for over a decade now. So how can we start to put that to work and thinking about that from increasing product usability, on-chain economics for Polkadot, and just preparing the ecosystem for broader adoption?
So it's not just a replatforming of capital markets, because I had a few discussions before and a lot of people look at that, but it's so much more. If I understand that correctly, maybe you dive into that, because in my mind, it's only assets moving from one person to another and settlement. But we discussed before, there's so much more in the Polkadot ecosystem, and maybe it's an interesting aspect to dive into.
Yeah, of course. And then before we dive into that, I'll give you a little bit just kind of background on Polkadot Capital Group. As I mentioned, I did join Parity back in 2022, and as I saw the evolving landscape of the regulatory sector, especially in the U.S., I'm based in New York, but currently at an offset in the UK at the moment. The Polkadot Capital Group, I felt that we can engage further with the capital markets, liquidity, educating new investors, some existing and previous ones. So this was a division that I launched in the summer of last year to be more present from a global perspective. And I think, what I wanted to focus on is a few different pillars. And that was really, how can we articulate different insights into what Polkadot was, what it is today, and where it's going, and the key importance of the blockchain. How do we expand access to Polkadot? And that could be across multiple different sectors. And then the last one is adoption. And I think it's really important as you kind of look from a journey perspective over those three key pillars to educate people on how are all these blockchains structurally different than maybe a Bitcoin or Ethereum? Why would one use one versus the other? And then how can we look at structured products for like an investor community to think about how you get access. I think last year was a pivotal moment in digital assets and stuff, obviously with a lot of ETFs coming out and some other products that allow ordinary investors and pension funds to hold these in their portfolios. And I think that's really an exciting moment to start to tell that story and that narrative. And then now we get to bring that adoption curve to the forefront, lowering barriers to entry to understand what we're building, how we utilize it.
Very interesting, right? And now moving one step out, so there is this, I create an asset, there is this, I can put it in my wallet infrastructure, but there's so much more. And that's what I meant with not only capital market infrastructure, but maybe other components to focus on, which I think is essential because that seems to be one of the differentiators among others, more superficially to others. And let's say not everybody's an expert in the deep technical parts of a blockchain.
Of course. Yeah. And then, on the point of replatform capital markets, I think a lot of the mind share today in blockchain digital assets has been around trading and finance. But Polkadot was never really built just to solve that use case, right? And I think it goes way beyond finance use cases, which don't get me wrong, it's important, and that's really I think the next stage. But from the beginning, as I mentioned, Gavin did coin the term Web3. So what was it? What it was embedded in Web3 vision and blockchain use cases, right? And that's around somewhat of owning your own data, creating a self-sovereign identity layer. And I think about this from a long-term perspective of a coordination layer for a sovereign internet, right? Because the internet today I think it needs radical changes around how we use it, how to identify who your counterparties are. And as you can see today, a lot of AI is disrupting that. So how can we kind of bring that back in-house and create some safeguards for people to operate on a social layer that knows that, Ben, you and I are both humans, right? I'm not, in a galaxy deep fake with speaking to someone else that's not Ben, right? And I think that's really important. And also, as I mentioned before, it's lowering barriers to entry. How can we bring familiar tooling to Polkadot to ensure that people can operate like they can on others, like a plug and play solution. And as I mentioned in the beginning, Gavin did write the Solidity smart contract language. And today, a lot of the financial primitives on Ethereum are smart contracts, right? So what's uniquely great about Polkadot now is we're offering that, and that'll go live in a couple of weeks, where all that familiar tooling will be live on Polkadot and beyond. And I think what's interesting, Gab being a technologist, is always thinking 5, 10 years ahead of the road,
So
right?
I adopt Polkadot and do my financial stuff on it, but then I can do more, right? That's the learning for me as an organization. If I'm diving into finance use case by adopting Polkadot, I have other. Give me an example, right? Give me an example of the use case that goes beyond just capital markets, maybe to get a little feel for it.
Yeah, I mean, think about fintech and payroll use cases, thinking about having privacy layer on there, but thinking about having a platform that you can connect all these different components I use on a day-to-day basis all in one instance. It's your internet layer where everything can get access. It's not just tokenizing this one asset and trying to get distribution. It's around your entire social layer that you interact with your peers, your family, others on an everyday basis. And what we're going to get to is a point where it doesn't have to be blockchain, right? It's just the next layer of the internet, and it offers all these benefits with it.
So what you described before is products and other components you are developing, right? And we have a lot of listeners who work in large organizations, but also others who feel the pain of delivery and execution almost every day. So when I hear you are doing delivery and execution and developing products, how can I benefit from it? What should I look forward to, and how can I co-write that roadmap you just described around Polkadot?
Yeah, and I think this is a problem that everyone's facing today, right? Where are the scalable use cases from a B2C perspective? Like I mentioned earlier before, a lot of these B2B use cases for AI and verifiable compute is really important today. But how do we get to that everyday basis utilizing this technology at merchants and beyond? And there's technological barriers, but there's also the regulatory landscape that needs to evolve. But what's great is in Polkadot, Parity Technology built the core infrastructure behind Polkadot. And now we're transitioning to having this stable infrastructure that works, and it's there and it's been built for a decade, into creating products, utilizing this technology. And there's going to be two components in what I see coming. One is expanding on the toolkit that people can use, right? Simplifying access through middleware, right? On top of that core infrastructure. And then on top of that, use cases with applications. So thinking about your iPhone of applications to actually use on an everyday basis. And then we can actually showcase why and how blockchain technology is utilized, right? And that's across different products from stablecoin usage and beyond, from identity, like I said, verifiable on a human versus not.
So I sit in a large organization. That basically means I can wire all these different data sources and flows I have via the Polkadot blockchain, and not only execute transaction, but verify the right person is there, ensure it's securely processed in AI because there's an AI compute component to it, and so on. So it's my everyday layer almost, if I understand it correctly.
Exactly. Just like you're using, say, Shopify today to build
Yes.
your websites, we're moving beyond the underlying code to building these building blocks that you can use as a business to improve your services and products today. And that may be around identity features, that may be from a cost savings perspective, that may be from a distribution standpoint, right? So I think you'll be able to leverage each of these toolkit components and not have to start from scratch. And also actually maybe potentially white label some of the applications that are built to say, okay, I can embed this technology into our existing offerings because it makes much more sense. I think about fintech today, right? Commerce. All this stuff is going to be impacted by stablecoin usage, right? And how can I utilize different blockchain infrastructures to make sure that I can scale while managing costs and offering a good, end-to-end user interface and experience. And I think some of that will begin to come to life. But like I said, this is such a pivotal turning point to actually see these use cases because of all the barriers that we faced. And that regulatory clarity in the US is starting to kind of shape that to allow us to do these things.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I agree with you. I think the regulatory clarity in the US and the abundance amount of capital available in the US really could accelerate the adoption of technologies like Polkadot and others exponentially. I think it's a truly pivotal moment. I mean, that's the right moment probably also to revisit what you want to do and who you want to serve. And that's the question I have maybe as well. So you don't only want to go to the big financial institutions, but who are the people you target, you want to help with, and you want to get into your ecosystem?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm not going to pinpoint because it's
Yeah,
not my job to say
yeah,
that. The technology is open source, right? But what is important is that it's not been widely done before is creating these pilots and these proof of concepts and these MVPs to showcase the scale, right? And I think mindshare today has always been on trading and execution, but how do we think about the finality of blockchain? That legal, I know this transaction has completed within X number of seconds, and the transaction doesn't really finalize in days, right? How do I think about coordination? Because if you're thinking about all these different financial institutions coming on chain, some of the protocols that are using these have only been built for a couple of years. Are they really scalable? And if they're all not going to be on one blockchain, how are you going to coordinate them across multiple, right? That's bridges. And in order to bridge between one blockchain to another, there's significant amount of risk that you need to evaluate whether you're an enterprise company or a financial institution. And what's unique about Polkadot, it is natively interoperable, right? So you don't need to use these bridges solutions that bring all this risk.
yeah. Bridging is truly, I think, one of the Achilles heels of crypto, right? Because it's you want to create an ecosystem which reduces risk across working with counterparties, but then you have new places where risk accumulates, right? It's like bridge is counterintuitive from my perspective to the blockchain narrative, where you don't want to have individual counterparties accumulating large amounts of risks.
Yeah, yeah, of course, and also from a transaction perspective, right? And a lot of these different blockchains, you need to hold the underlying token in order to transact, right? Which is a very clunky UX perspective from an end user. However, on our new liquidity layer on Polkadot, it's called Polkadot Hub. You transact in any token that's natively integrated. So if you have USDC or USDT, you can transact and pay your transaction fees in that token, which is like 4/10 of a penny, right? Which is great. And behind the scenes, the dot token is the underlying uh, transaction layer, right? So you as an end user, you don't have to worry about holding dot token. You can have stable coins, which is great from an end user perspective when you're building products and services on top of that.
So I could build without having exposure. That's important from a regulatory. I could have exposure and use and do transaction in the Polkadot ecosystem without directly buying tokens,
Correct.
basically.
Yep. You
Which
can
is,
trend.
I think, we have a big issue there for some financial institution who can't access certain ecosystem because they can't hold and especially send and receive assets on certain blockchains just because of the nature of where it could come from and where it could go down the road, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's something that has been part of a lot of different conversations from the new features that were just launched recently on Polkadot.
Let me understand more. So, what's the identity feature? Because that's another big discussion I see a lot, right? And it's like a little bit more on the forefront because many people say, "Oh, we still have identity offline," but then you don't use the full capabilities of the blockchain environment. So, can you give me a little bit of an idea what the Polkadot identity feature does and how it ties in, at least also from a roadmap perspective, with the rest of the use case. So let's assume I want to transact or I'm a merchant, like where could it tie in and what does it do for me?
Yeah, I think some of the identity features out today are just replicating the existing frameworks. Biometric scanning, iris scanning of your eyes, right? What that just it knows everything about you, right? However, from a Web3 mentality and an identity, I just need to know that you're a human then, right? And with that, there's some game theory solutions that will be embedded into Polkadot identity layer and some others as they evolve in order just to prove in many cases that you're just a human, right? You don't need to know all this data about you. And that's where I think you're going to have that differentiation for certain platforms, right? Obviously, if you're traveling, you need to, show your scan at the airport. But these are for other use cases where when you're creating applications that I need to know if you're going into a restaurant, right? You don't have to look at my ID and I know what your address is, I know your date of birth, and I just know that this is you're above this age. I've scanned and that's it, right? So
Or
those
you made the reservation and you're not sneaking in on somebody else's.
exactly. There you go.
It's an interesting one. It's so basically, if I understand it correctly, you give the ecosystem for the Web3 of the future, where actually everything is digital and digitally transacted, and you have all these different components. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and in the way I kind of think about it, as I said before, is like that Shopify type thing, right? These building blocks so you can plug and play and make your maybe it's your super app of what I want to kind of utilize on my social layer to coordinate on an everyday basis, and it redefines what the internet is, and it's not housed by one individual entity that has access, right? Because we've seen so many hacks throughout the year, even more recently with AI, as I was mentioning, owning your own data, that own self-sovereignty of your information is going to be even more and more important over the next 5 to 10 years.
So if I look at that, right, and then look at the next 5, 10 years into the future, right? And there could be a convergence of traditional crypto, digital assets, finance, and that infuses a whole ecosystem, which goes beyond just capital markets, as I understand from your perspective. But it's my everyday life whenever I transact or interact with other people. Um, what role do you think and do you wish for Polkadot to play in it? First, let's ask, how do you spend a lot of time on it? So you might actually give a great vision of how that future could potentially look like, and then maybe what role Polkadot plays in it.
Yeah, I mentioned this maybe earlier. Traditional finance, crypto, the internet back in the day, it's blockchain, it's digital ledger technology. This is just going to be another coordination layer behind the scenes, and everyday people shouldn't have to worry about this is on blockchain, right? It's just there, right? You're getting these features embedded into the solution. When you look on your app, you get the information, and then you can kind of go in and utilize it in your everyday life. And I think the way about programmable trust, right? You're not relying on one central counterparty to make sure. And I think you're seeing this a lot with data centers and power and compute. All of these different models were starving for power and everything. But if you can start to create an on-chain blockchain programmable trust, you're not going to have to duplicate all the work that is done today, and you're just going to run much more efficient systems on blockchain technology. And I think this is going to impact around, like I said, payments, identity, just coordination layers of how you utilize Web2 applications today, but just with blockchain and Web3 in mind.
So basically, I don't have to have 20 different plugins and 30 providers and then do everything individually, but I have a hub where I can get the money, the identity, exchange digital goods, all of that. Is that the correct assumption?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even think about payroll today, right? You might be able to have it much more automated. What about, you know, current certain payroll timeframes are every 2 weeks or maybe once a month? What if you're utilizing blockchain rails to drip feed someone's payroll to them on a daily basis, pay to earn, right? You can do that now with blockchain, with your identity, with your address to a USDC or other stable coin, and you can use that at everyday merchants, right? And you can start to pay your rent on time, or you're not going to be delayed because you're getting this income on a daily basis, right? With your identity, with all the different apps that you can probably think about today that use on your iPhone, there are benefits to putting it all into one. On, like I said, this next generation of a social layer of the internet that's all around like self sovereignty.
So because I want to ask again around that because you mentioned it before, your social layer. Explain it a little bit because it's a concept I know, but I think a lot of people might not have heard about it. And I think it's you mentioned those three times, and I have to ask. So you can point it out or explain about it a little bit.
Yeah, the way I think, and you mentioned it, like this hub, right?
Yeah.
Imagine on the internet today, you have to go to all these different websites. You have all these different plugins and apps that are on your iPhone. You're starting to see some financial companies do this today, right? Creating these super apps, but that's for managing your assets, right? A social layer is around similar concept to this hub, but everything you do on a social perspective, whether you're chatting with someone, you're managing your finances, you're paying for goods, you're ordering something. All these things can be on a social layer that you own, and no one else is capitalizing off of it, right? Because all of
So
our
nobody
data.
can read my data basically, but still the counterparty still can verify it's me or gets the money and okay.
Exactly, right? Because if you think about data today, everyone is monetizing off your data,
Yeah,
right?
sign in with, and then you choose the provider, but then the provider has full access to all
Yeah.
of your data. And basically, yeah,
I go on shop on Amazon today. They have my cookies, so that next company that is advertising and they're putting their ads out, they have my cookies. They know the data. They know what I search for, and they're monetizing off of all the information that we provide them, right? How do we think about that from your own self-sovereign perspective on you don't want all that out there? And that's just the very basic concept.
but that means also that a lot of barriers to entry to a lot of services, which either are regulated because they need identity,
Mhm.
which are costly because you have small amounts of payments, for example, or you exchange goods, and the whole discussion around point of sale, pricing of transfer pricing, all of those kind of things. They all are a little bit soft when you have universal adoption, am I right? Because the identity thing is soft, right? You just need a software plugin, and the
Mhm.
other person needs you allowed to interact with the identity. You can pay, you can exchange goods, you can do a lot of things there. A lot of intermediaries should watch out if you're too successful.
Yeah, that's of course, and probably the whole voting and government. We're not going to get into politics, but that will be a whole nother, I think, mountain to climb on that stuff from a digital
Yeah,
standpoint.
that's a very interesting one as well. But that gets too complicated. I'm happy that I can pay and don't get tracked too much and can maybe interact with somebody on the internet. No, it's not a bot.
Mhm.
As a side quest, I even can revamp capital market with it, but not now understand that's not the main case. It's so much more. I think it's a super interesting discussion. Thanks a lot. And let me know because we have readers reach out. You're always open to a discussion. People can come up to you and discuss these concepts because I think I always have people ask me, hey, can we get in touch with your guest? They just ping you on LinkedIn. What's the best way to get to you?
Yeah, ping me on LinkedIn. You can reach out to us at polkadotcapitalgroup.com, and we'd be happy to chat.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for the audience to listen. And thanks so much, Dave, for being here. Look forward to see you in person in the US the next time. And thanks for being there and enjoy your day.
Thanks so much, Ben. Great to be here.
Thanks. Bye.